It's time. Hello, everyone. I said hello. Come on. Wow. Rude. I'm Frank Cifaldi.
I'm Kelsey Lewin.
And we are the co-directors of the Video Game History Foundation. Just a show of hands, I'm just curious, who is already aware of the Video Game History Foundation?
You should ask who's unaware.
Yeah. Who doesn't know who we are, actually? That's probably better.
Yeah, there you go. See?
Okay, we do. Good. The rest of you can, read Twitter or something if you want. This panel is called Saving Video Game History, and I think specifically it's kind of our take on what that means, right? So, why should we save video game history, Kelsey?
Well, I think everyone is here, so you care about it already a little bit, right? We don't really need to tell you that the most highest grossing entertainment industry is an important thing, right?
Right. and it's easy to go down that hole of it makes the most money, but I think more than that, it's video games. I'm sure most of you in this room would agree. It's culturally just a part of all of us, right? And it's a history that we engage with as it's happening, and so it's something that I think should be sort of captured and preserved and available to the future. Maybe I'm crazy, I don't know. But
Yeah, you're crazy.
I'm crazy. But as this last thing points out, video game stories are cool. Video game history is really cool, and that's where kind of both of us came into this, is as historians ourselves, right? Trying to tell stories and having a really hard time doing it. Okay, so we want to save video game history. And in fact, the way that we approach it at the foundation, we really got to work on this elevator, I'm sorry. But it's essentially, we want to make sure that historians, and historians I use very broadly, like YouTubers, bloggers, whatever, like people who make tweet threads, right? People who tell stories about video games. We want to make sure that they have what they need, because really, when it comes down to it, there's just not a lot of tools out there for researching video game history outside of getting the games, right?
Right, and even if you do a lot of the work, the deep digging and stuff, it takes a really, really long amount of time to just substantiate anything.
Yeah.
I mean, if you maybe there's a press release that was scanned and put on the Internet Archive here and there, but there's just really not that much out there to look at.
So that's what we're trying to solve. So we're giving people the tools that they need to tell the story of video games. So video games tell the story of video games. Should we collect all the games, maybe?
Yeah.
What does preserving games even mean, right? Does it mean taking the physical thing, putting it in a space? Does it mean making sure that they still exist in the world by not throwing them away, right?
Like, is it having all of the games in one space, you can look at them and rent them or whatever?
Right, or is it, like we're saying here, maybe it means collect all the games, put them in a museum. Great, now people can come visit the video games, right? So let's collect the games. Let's collect all the games, right? Let's get every regional variant. Let's get every cover variant within that region. We was just talking today about Game Boy variants, right? There's 5 minor box variants for each game. Do we need to collect all those? And to make sure the historians can check out every box variant. They also need to plan them, right? So do we need to operate a space where we have all of this vintage hardware set up and maintained and maybe even duplicated if things go wrong? And do we need hardware engineers on site making sure this stuff works? Oh, that's the easy hardware. What about this hardware? Are we going to rent out, a bunch of warehouses and collect all the arcade games? Where does it stop? Where do we stop collecting all games? You can't, right? So is that the answer? Is that what historians need? So, okay, we have those. Now what, right?
So, yeah, when you have a game, what can you get from it? Have you guys seen Chris Kohler's Complete in Box series on Kotaku? It's really excellent. He goes through and he opens up a game and he tells you everything you can learn from having a physical copy of the game. So if you're playing it, you can see how it's played. what it looked like, what it sounded like. If you're good at it, I mean, if you're not good at the game, then it's going to be hard to research further in the game. If you have the box of manual, you get a little bit more information, maybe a little bit of how they wanted to sell you on it, but is that enough? Is that really the story? Is that a story about a video game?
No, it's not.
No.
We need more than just games to tell the story of games. So you can only extrapolate so much by having the object in front of you, right? Like you don't know who made the games. You don't know why they made the games, right? You don't know who played it in the time. You don't know what people even thought about it or how they were sold, if they were even sold, if they were Blockbuster exclusive. They were
mail order only, made in someone's garage.
Right.
Put an ad out in a magazine.
Yeah, it could have been mail order only or whatever. You don't really get the context of like what else was happening in the world even, right? Like Super Mario Brothers, you play Super Mario Brothers, it's a fun game. You don't understand playing Super Mario Brothers, like how new it was at the time. Like you don't understand like the sky's blue. Yeah, like that was kind of a new concept that the background color was blue. Like you don't get that context just playing a game. So that doesn't really get us that much. And that's why the Video Game History Foundation doesn't collect video games. I like to just keep that. I always expect like an audience gasp or something. I don't know. Like, what? How?
Yeah, we don't have any video games because we don't need to have them. Video game historians know how to use emulators. They know how to play the games if they need to. They need to actually research how the game was played.
We know where all the ROM sites went.
Video game collecting is a really popular hobby. You probably have a friend that has some of these games, even if they're rare. And other libraries are already doing a pretty good job of collecting all of the video games.
They are, and here's a really good one. This is two adorable curators at the Strong Museum of Play pretending to examine a couple Mega Drive games from their complete set of Mega Drive games that are in these like acid-free boxes in like this underground vault.
You have to do that thing where you like turn the vault to turn the whole wall.
Did he let you do that?
Yeah, that's awesome.
So point being that like we don't have to do that because first of all, at least one place is doing it, and they have literally millions of dollars more than we do. But also just going back to point number 2. I don't think it's necessary for us to collect games when there are so many game collectors who are, frankly setting the stage for places like the Strong. Like the Strong's collections came from collectors. They were either donated or purchased from collectors. So we're not worried about, your typical retail games. We don't buy. But we do have a library at the Video Game History Foundation. And it's sort of split into 2 main focuses. Essentially because, you're looking at the foundation. Like this is us. There's not a lot of us. We don't have a lot of resources, and so we kind of focus on the things that we think would have the biggest impact on our core mission, right? Of making sure that historians have the tools they need to tell the story of video games.
So first of all, that's media, which is the best way to get context for the time. We have a huge collection of video game magazines and books. Extensive is like a word that barely scratches the surface of it.
You're looking at the EGM wing of the library,
yeah.
Which this is now an outdated photo because we recently finished the EGM second press.
We also have video game media production material. We have GamePro. When GamePro shut down, we've got their like layout files, we've got publisher artwork, early game builds even.
Yeah.
Stuff that was sent to a magazine when they were working on putting together a magazine.
Right, so you not only get the context of the games and how they were played from reading the magazines, you even kind of get the context of like, well, what did the game magazine reviewer have in mind, when they had the game? What was sent to them? What words were in like the press release that the publisher sent to explain the game to them? Like, did they have like a walkthrough? There's also just really interesting stuff that happens with the layout files. For example, you mentioned that we have GamePro's layouts. In the files, I was opening up a preview of Mario 64, and in the magazine, there's 2 tiny screenshots of like, the very, very first time anyone had seen Mario 64, and the graphics are all kind of janky and not done yet. And there's 2 screenshots in the magazine, but if you strip away like the magazine layout, there's like 6 more screenshots behind it that they didn't even use. So we're even able to like recover interesting media by having that material. But and then in a similar sense, we collect video game development material. For example, you know, like old developers might have just taken bins home of like their handwritten notes and sometimes printed out source code from the old days and you know, sometimes even like unfinished builds of their own games, things like that, or like artwork. Like we have a really cool collection of artwork from a guy named Mike Dietz from his work on Disney's Aladdin on the Genesis, for example, or like source code. The actual source code for the games is really important for us and is we think maybe the best way to research how a game was made. So what we always say is, you know, we're not setting up games where you play Aladdin at home, but come study it here. So like I mentioned, we have a lot of the original artwork that was made from Disney Animation actually for the game. We have every magazine that reviewed Disney's Aladdin, so you get context about how people played it and what they thought about it at the time. And we actually have the source code from a completely different donor. So you could open up, for example, I don't remember, I think it's Cakewalk is the name of the composer instrument. So you can see Tommy Tallarico's work raw and edit it if you want. We even have the animation tools and stuff like that.
So this is, you know, when you're talking about video games, you're talking about the stories and stuff. You come up with a lot of, these media files will be really interesting if you, you know, you're kind of learning some of the stuff from the internet. We've disproved a whole lot of things by having these original files and having access to the magazines and that sort of thing. Has everyone here heard that E.T. is the worst game ever and it ruined the game industry and it is the game crash and all of that, right? Yeah, you've all heard that, okay. E.T. was not even the worst game to come out that month. Gorf reviewed worse. E.T. was fine. And this, who did this research on our website?
That was that you then? I don't remember,
okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, a wonderful historian put together this, you know, went through all of these old magazines and, you know, put together a comprehensive list of all the reviews. So you can see with this that this, like, kind of okay, but you never know it based on the internet discourse. So having access to these things can fundamentally change how we think of some of these games.
Right, another example of this is Earthbound. You guys know this game?
Yeah.
No. you know this game? So Earthbound, you know, it was seen as sort of a failure commercially, I think, by Nintendo. It just didn't sell up to their expectations, and it's because of that, for example, we didn't get Mother 3, I'm pretty sure, in English anyway. So why did it fail, right? The sort of typical narrative is like, oh, the marketing was really bad, it said this game stinks, blah, blah, blah. Well, if you look up every review, and I have, you start to paint a narrative of what a game reviewer thought of Earthbound, and if you have enough of a sample size of reviewers, I think you might get sort of at least a vague idea of what a typical player at the time might have thought about Earthbound. And what they seem to have thought about Earthbound is that the graphics are really bad, for example. That was sort of the common takeaway at the time. Like, oh, these are childish you see the words 8-bit graphics in like almost all of these. Like people that were reviewing the game just thought of the tile as too simple, as too sort of kiddie, right? And so it's like, okay, that's an interesting perspective, because no one thinks that now, right? Like now when we look at Earthbound, you know, the tile work is beautiful and the story and everything, like it's just a wonderful game. But again, like we had that slide earlier that was saying that if you're just playing a game, you don't get the context of what the world was. If you're flipping through these magazines, it's like, yeah, there's an Earthbound review, and then, you know, 2 pages later is like, you know, the PlayStation games that these guys are playing, right? Like, if you went to, I think it was Winter CES the year that Nintendo displayed Earthbound, like even Nintendo was just showing off all their Super FX, like 3D games. They had Star Fox 2 and Comanche and FX Fighter. None of those came out, by the way. and then like in the corners, this weird sort of nostalgic throwback RPG that I don't think anyone here was ready for. I don't think America was ready for this game, and you don't understand that just playing Earthbound. You play Earthbound, you're like, well, why didn't everyone buy this? And it's like, well, if you look back, it's like everyone was. We were on the cutting edge of like new tech, and everyone was looking forward. And this just, I don't think anyone could have marketed Earthbound. Okay, so you can get cool things out of magazines, right?
Yeah.
Let's go get some magazines.
Let's get some magazines. So this is actually, if you go back a couple slides, this is the magazine that this review came from of E.T. and Gorf. So we're like, okay, let's try to find this magazine.
Right.
There are 2 copies, like in.
Well, there's 2 libraries that hold any copies of electronic fun and games in the country. One of them is the Strong Museum of Play, which we mentioned earlier. It's like, okay, well, let's just say you're gonna drive to Michigan, 1,800 miles from your house, go study video games. They have 2 issues. They have Volume 1, Number 2, and Volume 2, Number 5. So, you know, this is a big reason why we specifically collect video game magazines, is because the libraries didn't. You know, you can't just go to a library and get a video game magazine. So a lot of people have been scanning stuff, but even the scanning scene, there's a lot of holes. If you want to like study tips and tricks, for example, you know, it's not for lack of trying. It's just that these magazines, especially these sort of tip ones that like, you know, you just kind of like tossed away when you were done. Like people don't tend to have these, and it's why for us, something like a magazine is so much more important than a magazine than a video game, because video games, you know, they were held on to, they were passed, you know, they were resold. Magazines were trash.
You can go buy so many copies of Mortal Kombat 2 on the floor, but I
Right.
bet you can't buy a single one of these tips and tricks.
If you find them, you let me know.
let me know.
And we need a lot. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we want to make this easier, and this is like where I came from, is I was struggling hard as a researcher and, you know, wanted to be involved because I want to make this easier. We can tell better stories if we have better access to contemporary materials. But the problem is the stuff is disappearing, especially things like magazines and stuff, you know, who's holding on to those? And even when it's there, they're hard to get at. We showed you how difficult it is to find a copy of a magazine, even in our like extensive library system here in America.
Yeah.
And then of course, you know, a lot of companies do have their development materials. They have their I mean, I won't say they have, it's not like great over there. They're missing stuff too.
Most of the old source code is gone
Yes.
in those companies, yeah.
But you know, there's stuff at companies, but they're not gonna let you look at it. That's theirs. That's, you know, video games are a very like closely guarded secret in this industry.
And I don't think we have a slide on this specifically, but you know, the development material especially is sort of our long-term vision. We believe that video game source code especially is a really powerful tool. When I say source code, do you guys know what I'm talking about? Does that make sense? Okay. So for those who weren't nodding, you know, if you have, let's just say like a Sega Genesis game, you know, if you have the cartridge, you can get the data off the cartridge, right? But all you're getting is the compiled game to run on the system. You're not getting the actual bits and pieces used to make that game. You can reverse engineer a game and sort of start figuring out how it works, but you're going to be missing a lot. You're not always going to understand how things work. You're not going to get you know, the notes that were left in the code by the developers explaining why this thing functions this way. I think what's most fun for historians is you're not going to see the parts that were cut out of the game before they compiled it, which tells you a lot about the decision-making processes, right? Like, oh, they were trying this feature, but they commented it out, and like, you know, if you have source code, you might even be able to like, you know, take out the comments and like recompile the game and play it with that feature and go, oh, that's why they cut it. It's terrible. But you know, you don't get any of that from the actual game itself. But you do by going into the notes and by getting at the source code and everything. Source code is very much a trade secret in that a video game company, you know, the fear would be that if someone has access to their source code, it's like, well, they can just clone our game and reskin it and know, you know, the secret sauce of the game. So our long-term vision is that we want source code to be a studyable thing that's donated by companies when basically after the commercial shelf life of this game is long over. I don't exactly know how we get there, but in the meantime, we've got some source code that we're not supposed to have, and we'll figure it out later. Okay, so you want to tell us a little bit more about? Wait.
Okay.
That's where we are. Here's part of our library.
Yeah.
You saw that earlier.
So this is part of like, these are sort of the arms of what we do on like a day-to-day.
Some of our services.
Yeah. The bottom photo there is probably the most interesting to most people, and that's that when a company shuts down, we show up with a van.
Yeah. So this was a few years ago when IDOS US. It's not when they shut down specifically here, but it was so IDOS was an American publisher. When Square Enix bought IDOS, all of the publishing arm went to the UK, and they shut down the IDOS US office. But Crystal Dynamics, the developer of the Tomb Raider games, was still working above where IDOS was. So for like 4 or 5 years or something, I love the irony of it, there was this tomb of IDOS, like under the Tomb Raider developers, but they finally, like, they got a new space, a smaller space or something, they were moving out, and I got a call that day, and it was like, hey, you have till the end of the day, we're throwing everything out. So we managed to rescue, it's mostly retail games, but we had a cool marketing archive out of them, like we had their marketing files and things like that. And then the upper right is, did anyone happen to read the October issue of Game Informer this year that had a 6-page article about us? One person, thank you, it was a good article. This is actually us on site at the offices of Game Informer magazine, where they had actually kept a lot of that original press material that was sent to them. So we have discs full of screenshots and trailers and press releases and things like that that was sent to Game Informer and
photos, paperwork.
Oh my god,
it's incredible, honestly.
They are hoarders and I love them.
Yep. You guys know Game Informer's been around since 1991. So it's everything they were sent before, before it started being all digital, everything they were sent since 1991.
We found the piece of film they used, that Sega sent for their cover for issue number 1. Like, it literally goes all the way back. So we spent 5 weeks full time in Minneapolis digitizing everything.
Well,
and
kind of most of it done, almost most of it.
We'll get there. But, we, when needed, can provide this sort of like bulk digitization of volatile data. Like this stuff is all on CDRs, right? And CDRs, if you guys are storing anything on CDRs, get it the hell off, please, because CDRs are not permanent, they literally rot. I mean, literally rot. Like we had a graveyard during our 5 weeks where like we pick up a disk and it's like, oh look, the data, you could see the data came, like literally physically is gone now, there's holes. Yeah, we're not the only game attempt.
Yeah, there's a lot of other efforts going on out there. Everyone sort of has their own brand of what it means to save and preserve video game history. There's museums, of course. We've talked about the Strong Museum of Play, which is excellent. There's the National Video Game Museum in Texas. There's the MAID in Oakland. Those are just in America. There's a lot of other museums in the world.
Can't remember the names.
Yeah.
Put them in the slide.
There's another NVM, but it's in like the UK or something. There's university archives are doing a pretty good job with the games themselves. Like we were saying earlier, libraries are doing good with the retail games.
Yeah, even the stuff that's not necessarily in favor with collectors sometimes will have a good archive. Like Stanford University has, there's a collector named Stephen Cabernetti who was collecting computer games. And when I say computer, I mean from like Apple II through like DOS. I believe he passed away in like the mid-90s or something, but he was hardcore. And Stanford was, he willed his library to Stanford, and so they have a really extensive collection of like big box old computer games, which is super cool because most of that stuff was, very, very pirated, and people didn't really maintain the packaging for that sort of thing. So there's a lot of good stuff there. Real museums are collecting video games now. That's nice. MoMA finally caught on, the Smithsonian. The Library of Congress has a video game archive. They only started it like 10 years ago maybe, but they came around and they're sort of backtracking and trying to like maintain a library, which is really cool because the Library of Congress, like that's where a lot of the master film reels for American cinema are kept, and I like the idea that they've sort of taken that practice and tried to apply it to video games. So that's something that could be really cool also. You want to talk about the internet?
Yeah, there's also a lot of other groups on the internet. There's ROM dumping groups that get data just up there on the internet, which is great. Not something a charity can do. Groups like Retro Mags that scan stuff. We actually send all of our magazine doubles to Retro Mags, anything they don't have.
We will, they just haven't given me their updated list of what they need, but we will.
Yeah, so we're basically, what I'm trying to say is we're friends with every other good efforts going on, right?
Yeah.
And emulation authors that are doing good work. Keeping this hardware playable.
Well, it's not just keeping it playable; it's like documenting it.
Documenting. Yeah. But also figuring out ways around weird one-off use cases, like this weird WonderSwan thing I got called Mama Mite that requires this one-off WonderSwan. And it's a version of the swan crystal, but like there have been 4 of them found ever. So, and if you put it in any other WonderSwan, it just says, please put it in a Mama Mite WonderSwan. So, there are people out there who are fixing problems like that so that you don't have to own one of 4 things to be able to look at it.
So you can emulate the pregnancy tracker for the WonderSwan. Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is probably our most common question, how do I help? And we're terrible at answering it.
We're still figuring it out.
But point number 1 is really the biggest one. It's just like the Internet Archive, archive.org, you guys know this website. Just throw things at them. It's an infinite digital closet. If you don't know what to throw there, you guys ever use the Wayback Machine? That's Archive's way of archiving old websites, and you could retrieve, backdated scrapes of websites. There's a Chrome plugin where you just put a button on your toolbar and you click it and it sends the page to the Internet Archive. Just, when you read a good article, just make sure it's archived. Like if you come across like a fan site that's still up, from the 90s or something, you're not sure it's on, just click a button. That's a really easy thing to do. And what we usually answer this with is, but I hate answering it this way because it's like, give us money. It's like, well, get involved conversationally, right? Because it's like, I don't know you, I don't know what your skills are, but come hang out and we'll get to know each other, and we'll probably figure out how you sort of fit in this world.
Yeah, you'll see not just efforts from us, but from all kinds of other people doing their own research, their own work. I mean, documentaries coming out and people putting together books and all of that. And sometimes you might know something that they need or be able to fulfill something they might need.
Yeah.
I just had to go to the University of Washington Library to go scan some microfiche for someone because it would, there was something that's just in an ad in a newspaper that the University of Washington Library had. Yeah. And that's close to me, and I was able to do it. So that kind of thing. If you're involved in the community, you'll find ways that you can help contribute and get more out there for people.
I mean, another Discord is like, Norm, the game historian, has a Discord, and he'll post in there about videos he's working on, and he'll just kind of be like, hey, anyone have anything related to this thing? And people will, will help a lot. This isn't a sexy thing to do, but it's interesting, it's helpful, is contribute to the Redump project. Redump is a website that validates the data of retail discs. So if you got a collection of PS1 games and you just feel like helping something, just follow the instructions on Redump, put it in, it'll spit out a hash and just validate that, like, okay, my retail copy matches previously dumped copies, so that data is valid. And if you know some of the stuff, if you have that uncle that works at Nintendo that I've heard so much about, that maybe has some stuff, or like something that I love that people don't think about is like, hey, did your dad like run a video store in the 90s? Like he might have been sent promotional things from game companies or even game distributors that might have like crazy info that we'd never seen before about like a game that never shipped or something.
Or even like, did you go to, E3 in 1998 and take a bunch of photos?
Yeah. Oh,
we need those.
Yeah.
We
don't have photos of E3 ever.
Yeah, but people need to see this kind of stuff. It's all out there. I mean, there's tons of this stuff out there that's just not on the surface because it's like, oh yeah, I guess I do have a camera full of some photos, or I guess I do have some of these notes from when, my uncle was making games at Nintendo or whatever.
And it's like, yeah, if there's physical things, maybe find the right archive for it. You could always talk to us, because we know everyone, we know where the best homes are.
Yeah, we're not selfish. We do often send things.
I don't want most things.
Yeah, but we often send things to other institutions.
We literally said, no, we don't want that NWC gold. Like, just get it away from us. But if it's digital, loop back to the top of the slide, throw it at the Internet Archive, just tag it correctly, it'll stay there. Like, maybe a researcher will never use it, or maybe Kelsey in 10 years will be researching some stupid peripheral, and we'll go looking for it.
Leave my WonderSwan pregnancy tracker alone.
and find that like piece of gold that's like brings the whole story together. You just never know with this stuff. Anyway, that's all we got. We left a lot of time, I think, for Q&A, because usually there is some. So thank you so much for coming, everyone. Come visit us on the web or on Twitter. Facebook if you want, if you're grandma, but you don't really look at it. And we are happy to answer any questions anyone has. Okay, do we have a microphone or anything, or should we just shout?
It's going to take a long time and it's wired.
Let's just shout.
Yeah, just shout.
Okay, so I'm going to say up front, you, yes.
I know you said you don't collect video games, but you've been involved, at least in the past, in securing like prototype games,
Yes.
and helping get them up and stuff. Is that you, Frank, or is that the foundation that does that?
The struggle with that
It's
question every day. So let me repeat the question. We don't collect video games, as you said, but I guess we've both really been involved with preserving the data from like prototype games and getting them on the internet. And the question was, is that the foundation or is that Frank? And I don't know the difference most days, but...
I'm not Frank.
Yeah, we share a lot of the same bad habits, though. With this stuff. It's something I tell a lot of people pretty often. I guess I'm answering this question really honestly now. We were having a fireside chat and I'm tired. A lot of times people are like, hey, I want to start a nonprofit like you guys are. And I'm like, well, you could do that, or you could have complete freedom. Like by being a 501c3, by like taking donations from people, that kind of constrains the kind of work I did before the foundation, where I could just be like, screw you, Nintendo, ROM's on the internet. So
that doesn't mean it doesn't end up on the internet.
Yeah.
It
True.
Just means the foundation.
That's actually a really, it's, yes.
The PR answer is no. Read between the lines.
Thank you, Kelsey. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just curious if there's any prototype of thing you are actually seeking out, or that you're this close to getting on an auction.
Man, we got
All
SimCity out there. I think we're Did you guys see SimCity on the NES? Come on, yeah, we recovered that.
Yeah.
So the question is there any like prototype game that is like a grail for us that we're seeking? Do you have one?
I mean, like, is everyone's just Mother 3?
I mean, yeah, that is the grail. Yeah. Like, if you're asking me, like, if I could recover literally anything, it would be whatever's left of the N64 version of Mother 3, because culturally that is an incredibly important game. Well, the series, I should say. And the N64 version was, like, basically a rough draft of the GBA game that had a lot of different material in it. And I think that Itoi's games are very personal to how he's feeling in the moment. So I think that even though a lot of what was in the 64 game ended up in the GBA game, I'm guessing the perspective was completely different, and a lot of the scenarios that got cut because of his own personal growth. And as a gigantic fan of that series, I want to see that sort of middle one. I think the world should too. Other than that, God, I mean, there's, I think, my grail for a long time was Penn and Teller Smoke and Mirrors on the Sega CD, but then we got that one out there, and that raised millions for charity. I did not expect that. Bioforce Ape on the NES was my big one for a while. Yeah, it's Mother 3. Anyone else have a big grail? I'm just curious. Shout it out. No one, okay, cool. I saw a hand over here, yes.
I was actually going to ask about Holy Grail, so I'll ask a different question.
Okay.
What does it mean for historians now that physical media is basically gone? Magazines and discs and cartridges for the most part.
It means we're leaning way too heavily on the Internet Archive.
Yeah. The question was, what does it mean for historians now that basically physical material is going away? And yeah, like we're in a really scary place where pretty much only the Internet Archive, one nonprofit, is capturing digital data, like websites and podcasts and things like that, and putting it in a place that is hopefully permanent. But that's scary, right? They delete things from the Internet Archive, not because they want to, but like if they get a cease and desist, they go, okay, and it's gone. And then it's literally gone forever in the world.
And it's pretty imperfect. There's a site you worked for a while that is impossible to write any articles on.
I was an editor at a site called One Up for a while. I don't know if you guys read One Up, thank you. I can't take too much credit, I was like the last. But
You ruined it?
I killed One Up. But it was a big part of my life, was working at One Up. And yeah, the Internet Archive has probably scraped most articles on One Up, but like you can't search One Up on the Internet Archive. You can't search any websites on the Internet Archive because they're only capturing like a snapshot of that page. They're not.
You can't use the search function on the website.
Right, because searching a website is like, talking to their servers that are live and saying, hey, find me a document and then feed it to me. And like, you can't scrape that. You can't, I guess you could if you like hacked into the servers or something and took it all. But, so yeah, the Internet Archive is, a very impermanent, well, maybe not very permanent, but it's not an easy, research method for this kind of stuff. What does it mean for the future historians? I mean,
It's harder?
It's harder. It's actually harder. Like, I think it's actually harder to get context for playing a game in like 2005 than it is for like 1995. I honestly think that. And like games especially, right? Like for the most part, with like microcomputer and cartridge games and stuff like that was on physical media, like the pirates got it. Like that was kind of one of our slides was like there are emulators, we're cool, but there wasn't. I don't know what the piracy scene is like for things like iPhone and stuff like that. It's fairly healthy, but we're also in an age where a game isn't just a thing that exists in its own bubble and you take it and I now have the whole game, right? Like well, there's patches, there's DLC, there's if it's an online game, right? There's games that are like just changing themselves daily, right? And when it comes to preservation of that stuff, I think I'm more interested in figuring out how we preserve not the game in the traditional way, but like what the experience was. Like I think we switch more to like oral history and gameplay video and stuff like that. Did that sad doomsday explanation satisfy you? We good? Sorry.
Over there.
How are you storing your digital information?
How are we storing? Okay, the question was how are we storing our digital information? We are storing on CD-ROM.
On floppy disk.
3.5 floppy, kept in a vault with a magnet.
It's really warm and humid in there.
Yeah. Kelsey's bird lives in there. So it's there's two redundant NAS setups and some AWS storage just for redundancy. And the AWS service that we use is called Glacier, I think. And Glacier is a service that Amazon provides where they'll literally mail you this weird like Borg cube that you plug into and you just like throw all the data at it. It just has like crazy capacity, and then you physically mail it back. And they store it on a server, but it's not like, and you can retrieve it, but you don't want to, because it's not a service made for that. But that's what we do, and it's right now what I would say is that the digital component of our archive is sort of in phase one, which is just like
Dump of data.
capture
Saved.
everything, figure it out later, you know, because we just, like, cataloging is full-time work. So, yeah, it's basically, 2 redundant things on site in 2 locations, and then some AWS backup that I really need to refresh now that you're unintentionally making me feel guilty about it. Anyway, yes.
How does one access some of the media that you have?
How does one access the media that the Video Game History Foundation has? So we have a physical library in Emeryville, California that is not quite open to the public, but it's something that we're working toward and are hoping for first half next year, maybe.
Yeah.
I said earlier this year, so it's kind of screwed that up. But that's the physical material. The digital material, because of the nature of being a 501c3, like we have to figure that stuff out. I think the law's stupid. The law is so limiting to ease of access to research materials. We're all going to be dead before any video games are in the public domain. So I think there's this sort of like common sense line that even like the bigger museums and libraries have to sort of straddle. I suspect that things like we talked about, like electronic press kits earlier, right? Like I suspect that we're probably fine just throwing those on the Internet Archive, and that's I'm not gonna like not making an announcement. I'm not saying that's what we're doing, but like. We still have some lawyer talking to do, but I suspect that like the material that was meant to just be, seen like that, that we could do something with that. When it comes to like builds of games, then that gets a little weird. I would prefer that it's all just online. I just don't like. Sometimes we get donated things, from companies that are like, it's only accessible in the library. It's like, oh, cool. But yeah, I guess that's the long answer. The short answer is work in progress. Does that make sense? You pick.
Yeah, you set a hand up for a while. I'm pretty sure.
How many estimated petabytes do you have of digital stuff?
Estimated what bytes?
Petabytes.
We don't. We
Petabytes.
have 0.0 something. I mean, we're not in the petabytes because we're not the Internet Archive. Like the Internet Archive is the big one. We currently have. I guess like 27 terabytes of data, and most of that is from the Game Informer project, where we ripped 10,000 CDRs.
Yeah. Well, and not just CDRs, DVDs. Too.
Oh yeah, all the DVDs.
Yeah.
We didn't get to the Blu-rays.
They
but-
get to Blu-rays. There's 2 giant file drawers. Well, no, tons of. Giant
There's more.
file
There's
drawers.
4 file drawers.
4 file
Well,
drawers.
4 file cabinets of 4
Yes,
doors each.
that's what I meant.
Of paper.
Of paper, boxes and boxes of photos, of film, of transparencies, of mini discs, and
Yeah. Slides.
yeah, there's all kinds of.
N-Gage games. Is Noah in the room? They had so many pre-release N-Gage games, like 60 of them. Historians are gonna thank us. But yeah, I mean, we're like I said, the digital part is sort of in phase 1 right now. Like I don't know that we even know like what the future is for a digital archive for us. We got to figure it out though, because we're relying on source code as being studyable as our main focus. But yeah, right now we're still. It's only a mere 28 terabytes. It's nothing. Okay, more hands. So with the VGHF beanie, since
Yeah.
you paid us money, you get to go next.
You're talking a lot about.
By the way, gift shop is in the museum. Please buy some merch so we can justify being here.
So far you've spoken a lot about preserving physical media.
Yeah.
As your primary focus. Are you seeking or doing much as far as recording audio commentary or like interviews
Yeah.
with certain developers and all that to get like stories from the work office from way back when, like that angle of stuff, or is that some other organization's specialty?
What? I'd love to do more oral histories. I mean, I do them like personally sometimes, do interviews with people, and like I have those interviews and they're safe-ish. I guess I should throw them on the archive. I don't know, why not? But there's 2 of us.
Yeah,
And
it's a resource issue.
Yeah, that's just not something we have the capacity to like, I mean, that's something that should be like a couple people's full-time jobs.
Oh my God, I miss interviewing people. It's
Yeah.
so fun.
It is.
What
Just do it
happened in
more
my
often.
life? Yeah. What's my task list right now? And the question, if you guys didn't hear, was, are we doing anything about like oral history and interviewing people and capturing that? I would love to. Another sort of potential future of the foundation. We're only in our 3rd year, we should specify. You know, like we're a fairly young organization. I like to say I spent the first 3 years sort of finding our footing, and I think we got 1 foot down. And I don't like committing to one singular vision. I think that we should be adapting to video game history as it happens. And so when it comes to oral history and stuff, yeah, maybe it's another organization, or maybe we get to a point where we become a foundation by the traditional definition of a foundation, which is an organization that provides grant money for research and for projects and things like that. We've done a little bit of that. Like we had what we called our writing fund, where we were able to give just these little micro grants to like journalists and historians, you know, like $100 or $2, something like that, to go do some original research and talk to people, and they get to keep the article, you know, they get to own the intellectual property rights for the article, but we get to publish it. That was kind of a fun experiment in like seeding money to see what we want in the world as opposed to creating it ourselves. So we might pivot to that model if we feel that no one else is doing it. But there's some good projects that are doing oral history. Like what is it? Is it the Smithsonian that is doing an oral history project?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that someone in our Discord is involved in. So there's some of that going around, but like again, for resource problems, like we got to figure out what we could have the most impact on with the limited resources we have, and I just don't think it's oral history, so it's not something we're focused on.
All right, I think we are at time, unfortunately.
Oh, it's a 45-minute panel. I thought it was an hour.
No,
Okay.
it's 45 minutes. But we are going to be in the museum that we put together.
Yeah,
so
do you guys know where the museum is?
So D135 and 136, the floor below this. It's right across from the exhibitor hall, and we've spent since Wednesday putting it, well, we've spent like months putting it together, but you know.
It's like,
physically,
has
yes,
anyone
it's
been to the
Wednesday.
museum yet?
Yeah.
cool.
What'd you guys think? All right, yeah. Anyways, if you have more questions, come find us. That's
Yeah,
where
we actually kept it open late on purpose. We were supposed to close at 5, but we were like, keep it open till 7, and all those people who were in the exhibitor hall, it's now closed, come buy your merch. So, I'm learning to raise money. I spent years not wanting to ask people for money for charity.
my stack of fundraising books is like. Anyways, thank you guys for
Thanks,
coming
everyone.
here.